From the dawn of human consciousness, we have been storytellers. We crave narrative, an explanation for the world around us, a chronological thread to bind our past to our present. But beneath the polished surface of accepted history, there has always been a deeper current, an undercurrent of disquiet, a nagging suspicion that perhaps the story we've been told isn't the whole truth. It is a primal human instinct, this fascination with the hidden, the suppressed, the knowledge that lies just beyond the veil of common understanding. We are drawn to the whisper of secrets, to the allure of a forgotten past, like moths to a flickering forbidden flame. This yearning for a deeper reality, for the true star story, is not a modern phenomenon, but a timeless echo in the human soul. It's the thrill of unearthing an ancient scroll, deciphering a lost language, or simply connecting disparate pieces of information that, when viewed together, paint a vastly different picture than the one enshrined in textbooks. This inherent curiosity, however, often bumps against the formidable edifice of orthodoxy. History, as it is presented to us, is often a carefully curated narrative, shaped by generations of scholars, institutions, and perhaps most significantly, by those who held power at the time of its telling. The victors, as the old adage goes, write the history. But what of the vanquished? What of the voices silenced, the cultures erased, the achievements overlooked? The very act of constructing a historical timeline necessitates choices, inclusions, and, inevitably, exclusions. This process, while often driven by genuine attempts at understanding, can inadvertently create blind spots, gaps, or even deliberate distortions that serve particular agendas, whether political, religious, or nationalistic. The grand narratives we inherit are, by their very nature, simplifications designed to provide coherence, but sometimes at the cost of accuracy or completeness. Consider the immense scale of historical loss, not always malicious, but devastating nonetheless. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria, repeatedly plundered and burned over centuries, culminating in its final demise around the 7th century CE, represents an incalculable loss of ancient knowledge. Imagine entire disciplines, entire philosophical schools, entire records of civilizations simply vanishing into smoke and ash. Or the Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258, which saw the House of Wisdom, a beacon of Islamic scholarship, utterly destroyed, its books reportedly used to dam the Tigris River. These are not isolated incidents. Throughout history, wars, natural disasters, and the relentless march of time have systematically eroded the primary sources upon which our understanding of the past depends. What remains is often fragmented, biased, or simply insufficient to paint a full and accurate picture. And so a spark of skepticism ignites. It begins with a nagging question, a detail that doesn't quite fit, a piece of evidence that seems to contradict the established story. It might be a persistent architectural anomaly, the sudden appearance of advanced construction techniques in a period conventionally deemed primitive, or a widespread style that appears across continents with no clear historical lineage. Or perhaps it's a chronological oddity, a period of history that feels strangely empty, a succession of events that seems to repeat themselves with uncanny regularity, as if a template were being reused. The official narrative, solid and reassuring, begins to feel less like bedrock, and more like a carefully constructed facade, beneath which something far more intricate, perhaps even startling, lies hidden. This discomfort with the neat package of history is not the domain of the uneducated. It often stems from meticulous examination of the very sources historians rely upon. Ancient maps, forgotten texts, archaeological reports, and even early photographs. For instance, many old world maps from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries depict vast, powerful empires in regions later described as barren or sparsely populated. Their names like Tartary or Grand Tartary emblazoned across swaths of Eurasia, often with sophisticated cityscapes indicated. Yet, mainstream history largely relegates these to footnotes, or dismisses them as vague geographical designations, without a cohesive, powerful civilization behind them. The sheer scale and consistent depiction of these entities across numerous cartographic works by different mapmakers, from Ortelius to Mercator, begins to challenge the idea of a historical blank slate. Then there are the architectural marvels, structures of immense scale and exquisite detail, often found in cities across the globe, from the grand state buildings of Washington, D.C. and St. Petersburg, to the intricate domes and columns found in places as diverse as India and South America. Many of these buildings, often attributed to the late 19th or early 20th centuries, display a level of material science, engineering prowess, and aesthetic uniformity that seems to defy the known technological capabilities and economic conditions of their supposed construction periods. The official narratives often describe them as products of rapid industrialization, yet the sheer number of these old-world structures, the consistency of their often cyclopean masonry, the advanced understanding of acoustics and heating systems, and the ubiquitous use of materials like polished granite and marble, stir a profound sense of wonder and, for some, suspicion. Could such a global architectural footprint truly have emerged so quickly, so uniformly, and often without extensive documentation of its true origins and builders? The Dark Ages in European history, roughly from the 5th to the 10th centuries, also present a fertile ground for historical skepticism. This period is often characterized by a perceived decline in culture, learning, and record-keeping, following the fall of the Western Roman Empire. While modern scholarship has nuanced this view, recognizing pockets of innovation and cultural preservation, the general narrative still paints a picture of intellectual stagnation and societal fragmentation. Yet, some independent researchers point to the extreme paucity of reliable primary sources from this era, the repetitive nature of some chronicles, and the seemingly disproportionate length of time attributed to such a period of minimal recorded advancement. Could such an extended span of historical quietude truly have occurred as described? Or does it represent an area where the historical record itself is either missing, misinterpreted, or perhaps even artificially extended? These are not merely academic debates confined to dusty university archives. These are questions that resonate with anyone who has ever looked at an old photograph, studied an antique map, or simply felt that a piece of the historical puzzle was stubbornly missing. The human mind, ever seeking patterns and coherence, struggles to reconcile these anomalies with the established chronology. The veil of orthodoxy begins to thin, revealing glimpses of a past that is far more complex, perhaps far grander, and undeniably more mysterious than we have been taught. It is within these fertile grounds of doubt, fueled by curiosity and a relentless pursuit of truth, that theories like Tartaria and the phantom time hypothesis begin to take root, offering radical new interpretations of our shared human story. They ask us to consider not just what history tells us, but what it might be hiding, what grand narratives have been consciously or unconsciously omitted, and what profound secrets might lie beneath the very foundations of our understanding. Our understanding of history is a carefully constructed edifice, built upon archaeological finds, ancient texts, and the collective memory of generations. But what if this edifice, so seemingly solid, conceals vast forgotten chambers, entire civilizations deliberately swept from the annals? What if the past we accept is in fact a meticulously crafted illusion? This radical notion lies at the heart of one of the most compelling and controversial alternative historical theories, Tartaria, the Lost Empire, and the mystery of the Mud Flood. Imagine a world where a single, technologically advanced civilization spanned the globe, its influence stretching from the Americas to Asia, Europe to Africa. A civilization whose grand architecture still graces our cities, yet whose name has been systematically erased from our textbooks. This is the core claim of the Tartarian theory, that a global advanced empire, often depicted as Grand Tartary on antique maps, existed until a relatively recent past, perhaps the late 19th or early 20th century, before a catastrophic event or a deliberate campaign wiped it from collective memory. The proponents of Tartaria point to a wealth of historical curiosities as their evidence. They begin with cartography, citing maps from the 16th to 19th centuries, like those by Abraham Ortelius or Gerardus Mercator, which prominently feature Tartary or Grand Tartary. For mainstream historians, this term was a geographical descriptor, a broad exonym for the vast, largely unexplored lands of Central and North Asia, inhabited by various nomadic Turkic and Mongol peoples, much like Africa or America, once denoted entire continents rather than unified nations. Yet, for Tartarian theorists, these maps depict not just a region, but a unified, powerful entity, a global empire whose true nature has been obscured. Consider the sheer scale and stylistic consistency of monumental architecture found across continents. From the grand, ornate buildings of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, with their neoclassical splendor and intricate details, to similar structures in Paris, St. Petersburg, Washington, D.C., and even distant Australia, theorists see a common hand. They argue that these aren't merely examples of prevailing architectural styles like Beaux Arts or neoclassical revivalism, but remnants or repurposed edifices of the Tartarian Empire. How could so many cities, supposedly developing independently, erect such massive complex structures in such a short period, often to be demolished soon after their grand unveiling at World's Fairs? The answer, for some, is that they were already there, ancient marvels adopted and rebranded. Further evidence is found in the enigmatic star forts, geometrically precise, star-shaped fortifications, whose intricate designs appear globally, from Europe to Japan, Indonesia to the Americas. Mainstream history attributes their invention to Italian Renaissance military engineers, a practical response to the advent of cannon fire, spreading with European colonial powers. But Tartarian theorists propose a different origin. These are not merely defensive structures, but part of a global, advanced energy grid, perhaps designed for free energy or communication, built by the Tartarian civilization. Their uniformity, complexity, and global distribution are seen as too coincidental for mere independent development or military fashion. Perhaps the most visually arresting and widely discussed aspect of the Tartarian narrative is the mud flood hypothesis. Travel to any old city and you might notice buildings whose ground floor windows appear partially buried, or whose basements seem unusually grand, with ornate ceilings and large doorways leading inexplicably into the earth. The mud flood theory posits a catastrophic global event, a deluge of mud, silt, or earth that buried the lower levels of countless structures worldwide, effectively resetting civilization and burying the evidence of Tartaria. Proponents point to photographs from the late 19th and early 20th centuries showing workers excavating what appear to be entire stories of buildings, revealing previously buried windows and doors. They questioned how such a widespread phenomenon could occur without a major global event. Why are so many basements clearly designed as main entrances or ground floors? The mud flood, they argue, provides a single, dramatic explanation for these pervasive architectural anomalies, suggesting a historical reset, where the survivors were left to inhabit the upper stories of a buried world, their true origins forgotten or deliberately suppressed. Mainstream historians, however, offer a more grounded, if less dramatic, perspective on these architectural puzzles. The Tartary on old maps, they explain, was indeed a vast, ill-defined region, not a unified state. The various Tartars were diverse ethnic groups, often in conflict with one another, and while powerful empires like the Mongol horde certainly emerged from these lands, they did not constitute a single, continuous global civilization. The maps merely reflected the limited European understanding of distant lands. Regarding the grand architecture, historians emphasize the powerful influence of global architectural movements. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were an era of immense technological advancement, industrialization, and imperial expansion. Nations sought to project power and prestige through monumental public buildings, often drawing inspiration from classical Greek and Roman styles, as well as the Renaissance. The World's Fairs were indeed ambitious undertakings, but many of their grand buildings were designed as temporary structures, often built with plaster and staff to mimic stone, intended to be dismantled after the exposition, explaining their disappearance. Architects and engineers of the era were highly skilled, capable of rapid and impressive construction, fueled by new materials like steel and concrete. The star forts, far from being mystical energy conduits, are well-documented examples of military engineering evolution. Their geometric precision was a logical response to the physics of cannon fire, designed to create interlocking fields of fire and minimize vulnerable angles. Their global spread is directly attributable to European colonial expansion and the dissemination of military knowledge. From the Vauban fortifications in France to the Dutch star forts in Asia, their lineage is traceable and their purpose purely defensive. And the mud flood? While visually compelling, the geological and urban development records offer alternative explanations for buried building levels. In cities built on floodplains or near rivers, natural sedimentation over centuries can gradually raise ground levels. More commonly, urban infill and the deliberate raising of street levels were widespread practices in the 19th century. As cities modernized, streets were often elevated to improve sanitation, drainage, and to create space for new infrastructure, like sewers and utility lines. Buildings would then adapt, sometimes having new ground floors built over old ones, or their original lower levels becoming basements. Examples like the Seattle Underground or the raised streets of Portland, Oregon, clearly demonstrate this historical practice, driven by practical necessity rather than a global catastrophe. Furthermore, there is no geological evidence of a global sudden mudflood event on the scale required by the theory. The allure of Tartaria and the mudflood lies in their capacity to challenge the accepted narrative, to provide a grander, more mysterious past than the one we are taught. It speaks to a deep-seated human desire for hidden truths, a suspicion that powerful forces might manipulate history for their own ends. While mainstream history offers detailed, evidence-based explanations for each piece of the Tartarian puzzle, the theory persists, fueled by a distrust of institutions and a yearning for an alternative, more extraordinary explanation for the world around us. It forces us to confront the question, how much of what we know is truly set in stone, and how much is merely a story we've been told? For centuries, the tapestry of human history has been woven with threads of discovery, conquest, and profound change, chronicled meticulously by scholars, archaeologists, and chroniclers across civilizations. Yet, what if vast swaths of this accepted narrative were not merely incomplete but entirely fabricated? What if within the annals of time there exists a profound void, a phantom millennium that never truly was? This is the unsettling proposition of the phantom time theory, a radical reinterpretation that challenges the very foundations of our understanding of the past. At its core, the phantom time theory posits that approximately 300 years of our recorded history, specifically the period between 614 AD and 911 AD, were artificially inserted into the timeline. This audacious claim suggests that the year we currently call 2024 should in fact be closer to 1724. First put forth in the late 20th century by German historian Heribert Illig, the theory argues that this fabricated era, a ghost millennium, was conjured into existence by powerful figures in the early medieval period, primarily for political and religious motivations. The alleged culprits, Otto III, Holy Roman Emperor, Pope Sylvester II, and potentially Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, conspiring to retroactively align the Julian calendar with the true astronomical year, and to create a glorious yet entirely fictional Carolingian Golden Age. Illig and his proponents point to what they perceive as a disconcerting lack of robust archaeological evidence for this specific 3-century span. They argue that the so-called Dark Ages in Western Europe are suspiciously dark, with a scarcity of monumental architecture, significant written records, and tangible artifacts that would be expected from such a long period of human activity. While the Roman Empire left behind a breathtaking legacy of roads, aqueducts, and cities, and the High Middle Ages saw the rise of magnificent cathedrals and castles, the period between the 7th and 10th centuries, they claim, presents a puzzling void, an archaeological desert that simply doesn't add up. Furthermore, the theory scrutinizes the very methods we use to date the past. Radiocarbon dating, a cornerstone of archaeological science, is acknowledged for its broad utility, but its accuracy is questioned when calibrated against historical timelines that the phantom time theory deemed suspect. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, offers remarkable precision, but proponents of the theory suggest that the long, unbroken sequences of tree rings used to establish chronologies, particularly in Europe, might contain a fabricated gap or be subject to circular reasoning, relying on the very historical dates they are meant to verify. They argue that the calibration curves for radiocarbon dating, often cross-referenced with dendrochronology and historical events, would be inherently flawed if the historical timeline itself is incorrect. Perhaps the most compelling claims made by the phantom time theory revolve around a central historical figure: Charlemagne. Emperor of the Franks and a towering figure in European history, Charlemagne's reign, from 768 to 814 AD, is seen as the pinnacle of the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of cultural and intellectual revival. Yet, Illig suggests that Charlemagne himself is largely a legendary figure, a composite of later rulers, or an exaggeration whose life and achievements were retroactively inserted into the timeline to provide a powerful, unifying founder for the Holy Roman Empire. The records pertaining to Charlemagne, particularly his biography by Einhard, are deemed by proponents to be suspiciously sparse or to bear too many resemblances to other historical accounts, leading to the conclusion that his era was invented to provide a suitable historical backdrop for the later Ottonian dynasty. The motivation for such an elaborate deception, according to the theory, was twofold. Firstly, to rectify the Julian calendar. Introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BC, the Julian calendar accumulated an error over centuries because its year was slightly longer than the true astronomical year. By the 16th century, when Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582, the calendar was approximately 10 days ahead of the equinoxes. Illig argues that this discrepancy, when projected back to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, would have been closer to 13 days, not the 10 days observed. To reconcile this, he posits 300 years were simply removed for history, aligning the calendar without raising suspicion. The second, and perhaps more potent, motive was political. The creation of Charlemagne and his vast empire would have provided a powerful precedent and legitimacy for later emperors, particularly Otto III, who sought to establish a universal Christian empire. However, against these provocative claims stands the formidable edifice of established historical and scientific evidence, which overwhelmingly refutes the phantom time theory. The archaeological record, far from being sparse, is rich and continuous for the period between 614 AD and 911 AD. Excavations across Europe have uncovered extensive evidence of Merovingian and Carolingian settlements, cemeteries, churches, and artifacts. From the Sutton Hoo ship burial in England, dating to the early 7th century, to the Carolingian monasteries like Lorsch Abbey in Germany, and the fortifications and urban centers across France and Italy, the material culture of this period is well documented. The architectural styles, pottery sequences, coin hoards, and burial practices show a clear evolving progression from the late Roman period into the High Middle Ages, with no discernible 300-year gap. Moreover, the scientific dating methods that the theory attempts to undermine are robust and independently verifiable. Dendrochronology, for instance, has established unbroken tree ring sequences stretching back thousands of years. The German oak chronology, the Irish oak chronology, and others provide precise annual dating, cross-referenced and validated across multiple sites and regions. These sequences show no missing centuries. They provide continuous year-by-year records that perfectly align with the established historical timeline. Radiocarbon dating, when calibrated against these independent dendrochronological records, consistently confirms the traditional chronology, providing a powerful cross-validation. Perhaps the most insurmountable obstacle for the phantom time theory is the sheer volume and consistency of written records from diverse, independent cultures across the globe. The Byzantine Empire, a direct continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, maintained meticulous chronicles, imperial lists, and ecclesiastical records throughout this period. Emperors such as Heraclius reigned 610–641 AD, Justinian II reigned 685–695 AD, and Theophilos reigned 829–842 AD, are all well attested, their reigns and interactions with other powers thoroughly documented. Crucially, the rise of the Islamic Golden Age, beginning in the 7th century, offers a parallel and entirely independent historical narrative. Islamic scholars and chroniclers meticulously documented their own history, scientific discoveries, and interactions with both the Byzantine Empire and the Frankish kingdoms. The reign of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, figures like Harun al-Rashid, reigned 786–809 AD, and events like the Battle of Tours in 732 AD are all consistently dated and described in both Islamic and European sources. The astronomical observations recorded by Islamic, Byzantine, and Chinese scholars during this period, including eclipses and comets, precisely match calculations based on the established timeline, providing an irrefutable independent verification of the calendar's accuracy. Further east, the continuous dynastic histories of China, from the Tang dynasty, 618–907 AD, through successive periods, offer an unbroken record of events, political succession, and cultural development. These Chinese records detail trade routes, diplomatic exchanges, and even astronomical observations that align perfectly with the established Western and Islamic timelines. The notion that a global conspiracy could have orchestrated the fabrication of 300 years, ensuring perfect alignment across disparate cultures with no means of rapid communication, and that this deception could have remained undetected for centuries, stretches credulity beyond breaking point. The phantom time theory, while an intriguing thought experiment that challenges us to critically examine our historical narratives, ultimately fails to withstand the scrutiny of overwhelming evidence. Its claims of archaeological voids are disproven by extensive excavation, its doubts about dating methods are contradicted by the precision of dendrochronology and the consistency of radiocarbon dating, and its reinterpretation of historical figures like Charlemagne crumbles in the face of countless independent, cross-cultural historical records and astronomical observations. While the allure of uncovering a hidden truth, of revealing a grand deception, is powerful, the rigorous methods of historical and scientific inquiry ultimately reaffirm the continuity of our established timeline. The millennium that never was remains firmly in the realm of theory, a fascinating speculation but not a historical reality. Thanks for watching Study Z. Remember to subscribe for more deep dives.